Okay, hello everyone, and to everyone online as well. Welcome to today's seminar, which is being hosted by the International Inequalities Institute at the London School of Economics. My name is Naila Kabeer, and I'm Professor of Gender and Development at the LSE's Department of International Development. And I'm also a faculty associate of the International Inequalities Institute. So I am very, very pleased today to be chairing the seminar, which is titled The Impact of Caste and Untouchability, a Missing Link in the Literature on Stunting in India, which is a part of the Inequalities seminar series. Today's speaker is Professor Ashwini Deshpande. Ashwini Deshpande is both a very good friend and a colleague, but she's also a professor of economics and founding director of the Center for Economic Data and Analysis at the Ashoka University in India, which is an amazing public good of data on India for people who would like to do some research on it. And she's worked with the economics and of discrimination and affirmative action with focus on caste and gender in India. She has published extensively in many leading scholarly journals, and she's the author of The Grammar of Caste, Economic Discrimination in Contemporary India, published by Oxford University Press, as well as Affirmative Action in India, published by Oxford University Press. So may I please ask our online audience to keep yourselves muted, but just in the interest of sociability, to keep your videos on wherever possible. And as usual, there will be a chance for all of you to pose questions to the speaker at the end of the presentation. We will take questions both from people present here as well as from our online audience. I should let you know that the next event in the seminar series is the emergence of a social decolonization, the question of social change in the French West Indies after World War II, and it will take place again on Tuesday, 29th of November between 12:30 and 1:30. So I am now going to hand over to Ashwini, and many thanks. Enjoy the event. Ashwini, you speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, so we have some time for questions afterwards, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Naila. Thank you to the Inequalities Institute for inviting me to present this seminar. Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. It's a real pleasure to be here, even though I'm missing being in person in London, but I see some familiar faces in the online attendees. So hello, Alpa, and hello, Partho, the two faces that I can see, and hello to all the others as well. As Naila said, it's a real honor to have this seminar chaired by Naila, who's an old friend and a colleague, and we have worked on labor force participation rates and women's involvement in the labor market in India. But this paper is not about women, it's about caste gaps that it's a part of a larger agenda of research that I have with the former student and now a collaborator, Rajesh Ramachandran, who's at Monash University. So these are some new results that we want to share with you. The motivation for this study is that early childhood stunting is a widespread problem everywhere in the world. 1 in 4 children worldwide are classified as stunted. What this does is that it affects growth in later life and development, poor development in children that results from poor nutrition, repeated infections, and inadequate psychosocial stimulation. And what is stunting? It's not just children who are short, but there is a threshold below which, if their height for age is below that threshold, then those children are classified as stunted. The precise definition of this is if the child's height for age is more than 2 standard deviations below the WHO standards median, then that child is classified as stunted. There is a lot of research on early childhood stunting, particularly up to 2 years of age, and all the way also actually up to 5 years of age, which has shown that early childhood stunting has adverse consequences that affects the adult for the rest of their lives. So it's poor cognition, poor educational performance, low adult wages, as it turned out, and lost productivity. So it's a really serious health condition that affects the stunted children who don't come out of stunting all the way through their adulthood. And India is home to nearly a third of world's stunted children. And this is not just because it's a large country, a large with a large population. The prevalence rate of stunting amongst children between 0 to 5 years of age is 38.6 children. So nearly 40% children are classified as stunted. China, which is equally large in terms of population, in comparison has a prevalence rate of 4.8%. So the early childhood stunting in India is a really serious problem. And that has led to a great deal of research with at least three very influential papers. But the research has focused on what is called the Asian enigma or the Indian enigma, which asks the following questions. Why are stunting rates higher in India, which is richer, compared to sub-Saharan African countries that are poorer? Because stunting is directly correlated with income levels. So stunting rates in richer countries are lower than stunting rates in poorer countries. By that logic, India should have a lower incidence of stunting compared to countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And this has been a puzzle. It's been an enigma. It's called the Indian, some people call it the Asian enigma. Some people call it the Indian enigma. But the literature on stunting has been dominated by this question. And that's the answer to this question that the literature has thrown up is basically can be summarized in three sort of schools of thought. There's a very well-known paper by Seema Jayachandran and Rohini Pandey that talks about the birth order effects, which is the fact that the firstborn children in India are not more stunted compared to sub-Saharan African children. But the stunting really kicks in from the second birth order, particularly if the second child is a girl. And they attribute it to poor nutrition, gender discrimination, etc. That's one school of thought. The other is what is called the disease and sanitation environment. So prevalence of open defecation, lack of sewage facilities. So basically, the immediate neighborhood of the house is prone to diseases, and that's what leads to early childhood stunting. So that's the other school of thought. There's one paper that also talks about supposedly the genetic differences between Indians and Africans. Africans in general are taller than people in India, but that genetic evidence is very, very flimsy. That's Arvind Panagaria's paper. However, these are the three sort of major papers in this field. What we found when we started looking at this data is that this entire focus on explaining the India-Africa child height gap has completely ignored or overlooked, or not by design perhaps, but just didn't acknowledge or didn't notice the huge caste gaps in childhood stunting within India. And so when we look at that picture, so focus on panel D first, which is the average rates of stunting. And you can see that the average rate of stunting for sub-Saharan African children is 32%. But when you break up the Indian population into different social identities, you see that the upper caste Hindu children, which is the next bar, are less likely to be stunted. The stunting rates among upper caste Hindu children is lower than the stunting rate amongst sub-Saharan African children. And if you look at scheduled caste, SC and ST bars, and I'm going to explain what these categories are, these are the marginalized caste and tribal groups. So all the other groups in the country have stunting rates far higher than the sub-Saharan African average. So it's not really that Indian children are shorter than sub-Saharan African children. It's the marginalized children from marginalized and stigmatized groups in India. Those children are shorter or are more stunted compared to the sub-Saharan African children. On the left side of the panel, panel C, is what I mentioned earlier, which is a technical definition of stunting, which is height for age Z-score. So here it's starting from 0 and going down. So it's a negative axis. So the lower down it goes, the more stunted, the higher is the incidence of stunting. So when you read the Z-score chart, you see the how far the bar is going down below 0. But you can look at the just average rates of stunting on the right-hand side in panel D. And so if you compare this to panel B, which shows the overall India-Africa stunting incidence gap, Africa being at 32 and India being at 39, this is the puzzle. This is the gap that earlier commentators have tried to explain. What we are saying, focus on panel D, not on panel B. And when you focus on panel D, you realize that the real issue is not so much all children in India are, average rates of children, comparing all children in India to all children in sub-Saharan Africa. That's not the right comparison to make. The comparison is really between caste groups. So this actually, when we were looking at, when we saw this figure, we were suddenly struck by the significant caste-based differences in stunting, and that sort of led to this particular exploration. So what are the specific research questions that we are addressing in this particular paper? One is we are going to document the full picture of caste disparities between two ends of the caste hierarchy, the upper caste Hindus and the scheduled caste, and I'm going to come to the definition of this group called scheduled caste. And we go beyond just documenting the disparities. We try to talk about or pinpoint the role of caste-based discrimination in moderating these gaps. So let's first look at the social groups. What are the social groups we are talking about? So what we have done is we've used the National Family and Health Survey data, talk about the data in a minute, but we have created 5 categories combining the 2 major cleavages in Indian society, which is caste and religion. So we've created a group of upper caste Hindus, the scheduled castes or Dalits, the castes that were considered untouchable until the country achieved independence. With the name of pride for this community is Dalits, or the oppressed. The scheduled tribes, which is again an administrative terms. These are the tribals, the original tribals. The other backward classes or OBCs, which are sort of a group of intermediate castes and communities, and Muslims that are not included. So OBCs also include some Muslim groups. So all other Muslims that are not classified as OBCs or don't self-identify as SC or ST, we call them upper caste Muslims. Now, there is no formal administrative recognition of caste within the Muslim community in India, but there is a plenty of evidence to suggest that there are caste-like cleavages, both amongst Christians and amongst Muslims. And in fact, the current ruling party, which overall is not pro-Muslim, but is making a very concerted attempt to reach out to what it recognizes as Dalit Muslims. So the lowest strata of Muslims, and there's an active outreach program. So there is a recognition of caste-like cleavages within the Muslim community. This table just gives the classifications on how these categories got to be made. Happy to take questions on it later on. So why do we say upper caste Muslims is because if you remember this figure which I showed earlier, you see here upper caste Muslims and even upper caste Muslims have a stunting, children from upper caste Muslim communities have a stunting rate of 39% compared to 32% for sub-Saharan Africa. So even though within Muslims, these are the better off children, but in the larger Hindu-Muslim contradiction, you see, higher rates of stunting, even amongst upper caste Muslims. So these cleavages are extremely important. And that's what we are trying to explain. So I explained the first part. Now, caste-based discrimination. There is a huge literature, including, reports and ethnographic literature, sociological, anthropological. I won't have time to go into all that, but these are just some quick bullet points of the kinds of arenas in which you see discrimination. So residential segregation, hate crimes, denial of temple entry, prohibitions on intercaste marriages, forms of bonded labor, segregations inside classrooms, discrimination by teachers, discriminatory access to water and irrigation, unequal treatment under the justice system. If you see the incarceration rates in Indian jails, you find, for example, CEDA, my center, we just did a report on this, that under trials that are in jail in India are disproportionately belong to these groups, etc. Discrimination, public seats, and so on. I have lots of instances of these in my book, but there are other sources as well. Now, for the purposes of stunting, all these things, of course, in a larger sense matter, but the specific instances of discrimination that affect health are the higher likelihood of Dalits being either denied entry into health centers, or if they do enter, discriminatory treatment by healthcare professionals, often public health workers who are supposed to go to all villages or inside all homes, often are reluctant to go inside the homes of a Dalit household because of the belief in untouchability. Dalit children report experiencing caste-based discrimination in receiving medicines, in testing, anything that requires touching children or their mothers. There are instances of discrimination reported in ethnographic studies and in other scholarly workers. So these are the sort of, these elements of discrimination are the ones that from the point of view of this particular paper are going to play an important role, because I think we think that they explain the mechanisms that through which we can explain our results. Now, what is the particular manifestation of caste-based discrimination that we are going to examine in this paper? There is a practice called untouchability, and all those familiar with the caste system would know what it refers to, but it's illegal. So in principle, there is no untouchability. It's a crime. So if in fact an instance of untouchability is reported and the police does register that complaint, that person can be tried under the atrocities against SCSTs, Prevention of Atrocities Against SCST Act. So it's a very serious offense. So it's illegal, it's punishable by law, but it's widely pervasive. Either overt or covert instances of untouchability thrive. And there is a data set called the India Human Development Survey data, the second round of which in 2011-12 asked respondents whether they engage in any untouchability related practices, and it was just a yes/no response. So it's a very, sort of in some sense, a very crude question. It doesn't ask about each specific act of untouchability, but it's really whether the household respondent, professes to practicing untouchability, and we believe that it would be underreported because it's illegal. But about 30% households on aggregate report practicing untouchability. The survey also asked SC Dalit households if they experienced untouchability. So again, it's just a crude sort of a simple cut of did you practice and did you experience? And we tried to map the two to see whether the responses were consistent. So in states, and these are the dots are the states of India. So in the states where a higher proportion of households reported practicing untouchability are also the states where a higher proportion of Dalits reported experiencing untouchability. So this is just a consistency check to make sure that the responses that we are getting, are meaningful. They're not just a random response being given by respondents. So, we believe that if you put the two together, it's definitely capturing something. And we believe, obviously, that this is an underestimate. So this is the particular manifestation of caste-based discrimination that we are going to be using in this paper for our estimates. Now, what we have done is we've linked the data on the practice of untouchability with the data on child height and stunting. Why? Because we want to see whether the two are correlated or not. Is there any link between these two phenomena? And so we've, for example, we looked at, again, look at panel B, that's just the proportion of households that are, of children that are stunted. And what we did was we divided the proportion of households who confess to practicing untouchability into quintiles, into 5 groups. Okay, so the lowest is the lowest quintile, and at the right hand side of the x-axis is the highest quintile. So as the states, the states that are in the highest quintile, you see the black line, which is the proportion of stunted children amongst upper caste Hindus. That really doesn't change. I mean, there's a slight uptick and then it goes down. But if you look at the confidence intervals, they sort of overlap. But for Dalit children, you see that as the proportion of households practicing untouchability, at the highest, actually it's in the second, third, and fourth quintile, you see the proportion of children stunted amongst Dalits shoots up. So as a proportion of households that practice untouchability increases, it increases stunting rates amongst Dalit children, but it does not change significantly the stunting rates amongst upper caste children. So stunting, untouchability adversely affects early childhood stunting amongst Dalits, but not amongst upper caste children. So what do we do first? We first look at the gaps at the 2 ends of the caste spectrum. Sorry. Wait. Yeah. So this is just all children, and divided by, on the x-axis, you have a child's age in months. So you're going from 0 to 60 months, so 0 to 5 years. And you see that other than just probably the first 10 months or so, even where the stunting rates amongst Dalit children are higher, but as the children, as you go from about 10 months to about 60 months, you see that the stunting rates amongst Dalit children are consistently higher than the stunting rates amongst upper caste children, Hindu children. So that's the global picture. I don't know what's happening. Yeah. We can look at the picture by district as well, right? And so, of course, we had lots of tables by district. So, but this is just a summary of the district results. So panel A is telling us the number of districts in which the share of stunted children among total SC children, the first one is between 0 and 20%, then between 20 and 30%, and so on, and then share greater than 50%. So you see that there are 8 districts in which the share of stunted children amongst Dalit children is less than or equal to 20%. Whereas the corresponding number of districts for upper caste children is 65, right? So the number of districts where stunting incident is low is far higher for upper caste than for Dalits, right? And similarly at the top end of the spectrum, so supposing the share of stunted children greater than 50%. So there are 116 districts in India where the share of Dalit stunted children is greater than 50%. So more than 50% of all Dalit children are stunted. Whereas there are only 10 districts in India where more than 50% of upper caste children are stunted. So this is the meaning, this is how you read this particular table. You can, see this whole thing again in a map. And the darker areas just show a higher prevalence of stunting. So you see the darker reds, there are many more districts that, this is the same thing that I showed in the table. So the darker red is more than 50%. And so you see how many districts here where more than 50% Dalit children are stunted. Okay, so basically this, we can see that there are systematic gaps between the stunting rates amongst Dalit and Hindu upper caste children that are, you can see at the district level, you can see them at the all India level. Oh, I don't know why this came twice. I apologize for that. Wait. Sorry about this. Okay, so we are back on track. So now what do we do? So now we have seen two things. One is the prevalence of untouchability. We've seen the prevalence of stunting, the geographical spread. And we also saw one graph which showed that as the prevalence of untouchability increases, the proportion of the incidence of stunting among Dalit children increases. So there is some link between the two. But now we want to go beyond that. And we want to show whether one thing causes the other thing, right? So is it that prevalence of untouchability that's causing higher rates of stunting amongst Dalit children? So to establish a causal link, what we do is we look a little bit at the historical spread of the caste system. And we reference a term called Aryavarta, which is called the land of the Aryas, which was the land in which the original Indo-Aryan tribes that came from Iran settled. And this has been described in several texts, including the Manusmriti. And that's and from in all the texts, it says that it's to the south. It's bounded by the Vindhya Mountain range. So it's really the northern part of the country, which is bounded on the south by the Vindhya Mountain range. And the Manusmriti also has a description. We've looked at several texts that give a description of the region that was called the Aryavarta region, or the land of the Aryas, which is where the Aryan tribes first settled and brought with them sort of the caste system in some sense. Okay, this is a picture from the late Vedic period. It's a map from the late Vedic period. And you see this line here. This is the Vindhya Mountain range, which sort of slices India into two halves, which is, broadly speaking, the north and the south. So we are going to use this sort of the natural divide that is presented by the existence of the Vindhya Mountain range. So what do we do then? Basically, we take a map of the Vindhya Mountain range. We overlay the data from the National Family and Health Survey, the 4th round, which is 2015-16, which gives us our stunting data, right? And what we do is we get we map it on the geographical coordinates for all our respondents in the data. And you can get the GIS coordinates for NFHS 4, right? So sorry about the lurid colors, but it sort of looks like this. So what you can do is you map the NFHS geographical locations onto the the GIS map that includes the Vindhya Mountains range. I personally don't know how to do this. We have to get a geographer to help us sort of overlay the NFHS onto the shapefile for the Vindhya Mountain range. So now we can assign every individual whose district location we know, or the sampling unit location we know from the data, as either living to the north of the Vindhya Mountain range or to the south of the Vindhya Mountain range. And what we can do is we can calculate the distance for each of the respondents to the closest point on the Vindhyas for them compared to their location. And then we choose a band of 100 kilometers to the north and the south of the Vindhyas. And we compare the outcomes of upper caste and Dalit children using what is known as a difference in differences estimator. Okay, so here's first a picture, pictorially what this looks like. So again, this is, okay, the stunting on this time is on the left side. So if you look at the panel B, which is the one that you see on the left, this is average rates of stunting again. And the shorter bars are up for upper caste Hindus. The blue bar is north of the 100 kilometers to the north of the Vindhyas. And the red bar is 100 kilometers to the south of the Vindhyas. And you see that for the upper caste Hindu children, whether they live to the north of the Vindhyas or to the south of the Vindhyas, there is no significant difference in the rates of stunting for these children. But for Dalit children living to the south of the Vindhyas, 100 kilometers to the south, are much more likely to be stunted compared to Dalit children living to the south of the Vindhyas. So stunting rates 100 kilometers to the south, to the north, are 54% for Dalit children, compared to 46% to the south of the Vindhyas. So the north-south gradient in stunting incidence is quite stark for Dalit children, and you don't see that for upper caste children. The panel A is again the height for age Z-score, and again you see the same picture there, which mirrors. So you see the sort of longer blue bar for Dalit children living to the north of the Vindhyas compared to, so these are height for age Z-scores, right? So this is the pictorial description of what we are going to what we are showing through the regressions. And so again, you can ignore this equation or look at it whatever your preference is. But basically, this is what we estimate. And we control for a whole range of factors that might account for the north-south difference. So population, precipitation, heredity, is it cropping patterns? We don't have data on diets, but so the closest we can get is cropping patterns. Mean temperature, wet days for period 2005 to 15, agricultural season length, proximity to water, proximity to borders, latitudes, et cetera, plus individual level factors, right? So there's a lot. I mean, all the material, and obviously all of this data is not from NFHS, but we've got it from different sources. But we have been able to control for all of these factors. And having control for all of these factors, now look at this line which says SC interacted with south of the Vindhyas. So overall, the first row is SCs, and the comparison category is UC Hindus. So SCs are more likely to be stunted than UC Hindus, something that we've already seen. And the coefficient goes up in columns 3 and 4 compared to 1 and 2. Which is that when they are, and so we do different gradients as well, which is 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers, 75 kilometers, just to make sure that, there's nothing sacrosanct, or it's not the 100-kilometer distance that's driving our results. So that is not the case. The south of the Vindhyas overall, and this is, the coefficient for the upper caste, south of the Vindhyas overall, children are differently stunted than the north of the Vindhyas. So we saw that already in the upper caste caps. But if children are SC and to the south of the Vindhyas, they are less likely to be stunted compared to if they were SC and to the north of the Vindhyas. So there is some difference in which SC children's stunting rates get affected relative to, depending on whether they are to the north of the border of Vindhyas or to the south of the Vindhyas. Okay. I don't know why these, sorry about this. Yes. Okay. This is, okay, I can't see my own slides. This is the height for age Z-scores. The earlier table was stunting, this height for age Z-scores. Again, we find here that if they were SC children and to the south of the Vindhyas, the height for age Z-score is going to be bigger, which is why there's a positive sign here. Oh gosh, I don't know why this is going on back. Apologies for this. Keeps going back to the same thing. Yeah. All right. So at least the result is clear. The gradient, the role of outcomes of Dalit children to the north of the Vindhyas are significantly worse than the outcomes of the Dalit children to the south of the Vindhyas if we restrict our attention to the 100-kilometer band. And we've played around a little bit with the length of the band. If you go further down and further up, then too many things change. And so we don't really know. That's the reason why we've taken the Vindhyas as the cutoff point. So what could it be? We presented this earlier and people have said, well, how do you know it's caste? It could be just class or socioeconomic status. How do you know it's caste? How do you know that it's not some generic, geographical gradient that's accounting for these things? And so we do a sort of robustness checks. We look at wealth index score. We look at bottom 60% of wealth distribution to the south of the Vindhyas. Again, no difference. We took a look at wealth index score and south of Vindhyas. Again, no difference. So the real difference we see is only if you were SC and to the south of the Vindhyas, not any other indicator of class. So it's really the fact that these children belong to a marginalized and stigmatized caste group. And so the result is pretty robust, and we've tried alternative specifications as well. So why do we get this result? Why do you see this gradient between the north and the south? And this is where we will bring in our earlier discussion of untouchability. So our explanation is that there are health-related practices that are informed by the practice of untouchability that negatively affect the well-being of Dalit children and their mothers through discrimination in the provision of public health services. So again, we use a similar kind of an estimation strategy, and we look at a whole range of outcomes that affect maternal health and children's health, right? So we look at, for example, this is for mothers. So did they get prenatal care or not? Did they get home delivery of healthcare services or not? Are mothers shorter than, the stature, the height of the mothers, and years of education? So SCs are more likely to not receive prenatal health care. SC mothers are more likely to not receive, I apologize. Sorry, this is home delivery as in home delivery of children. Please apologize for that. So SC mothers are more likely to give birth to children at home, so not have institutional deliveries. They are likely to be shorter than upper caste mothers, and they are likely to be less educated compared to upper caste mothers. And all of these factors are, not all of these, well, all of these factors are affected by SC residents interacted with the south of Vindhyas. So the SCs in the south, or SC mothers in the south of the Vindhyas, are worse off than the SC mothers to the north of the Vindhyas. So prenatal care, home delivery, SC mothers to the south of the Vindhyas are better off compared to the north of the Vindhyas. So are less likely to get no prenatal care compared to the north, to double negative here, are less likely to have a home delivery compared to the north, are less likely to be shorter compared to the north, and have higher years of education compared to the north. So this is of mothers living, in the 100-kilometer band, north and south of the Vindhyas. And we look at vaccination rates for children. So we look at the BCG vaccine, the DPT vaccine, all 3 doses, polio vaccine, and measles vaccine. These are essential vaccinations that are prescribed by Indian government, and the public healthcare system gives them for free to all children. And overall, SC children are less likely to receive these vaccines compared to Hindu upper caste children. But SC children living to the south of the Vindhyas are more likely to receive these vaccines compared to SC children to the north of the Vindhyas. So there is an SC upper caste disadvantage in receiving vaccines, but that disadvantage is lower for SCs living to the south of the Vindhyas than to the north of the Vindhyas. So the argument that we are making is that there is discrimination against Dalits overall in India, and we saw that by the All India figures, and we saw the sort of geographic discrimination. But the discrimination for Dalit children is higher in regions that historically had a stronger version of the caste system than regions that had a less strong version of the caste system. And we established that by the geographical boundaries of what is the Aryavata region. So these are practices that have sort of continued, not perhaps in the same way that you saw them at the time when the Aryans came, but certainly there is a vestige of the way in which these practices are institutionalized. And so overall, what do we do in this paper? First of all, we provide evidence to show that if we are talking about the stunting of children, the problem of stunting of children in India, comparing with Africa is okay. But I think the more important question about stunting is caste differences or social group differences within India. The highest incidence of stunting are overall in a group of states that used to be or are still informally referred to by the acronym of BIMARU, which is Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh. Bimar in Hindi means sick or ill. So BIMARU is an acronym that sort of denotes low socioeconomic development of these states. And this is the way these states used to be referred. So this is the northern Gangetic Plains. We find that stunting rates amongst Dalit children or SC children are highly correlated with the practice of untouchability, but this is not the case for upper caste children. And in order to establish a causal link, we look at the historical boundary of the Vindhya Mountain range and show that SC children are more likely to be stunted to the north, 100 kilometers to the north of the Vindhya Mountain range compared to SC children to the south of the boundary range. And what are the mechanisms? Why do we see these differences within the SC children? Is the difference in access to healthcare, both for mothers and for children, which is mediated by the practice of untouchability. So overall, what our paper shows is widespread societal discrimination, social discrimination on account of identity, in this case caste, significantly affects child health outcomes among stigmatized groups. And this has a sort of cascading effect to their lifetimes that persists and leads to adult life outcomes. And so, the cycle sort of perpetuates. So if we want to break this cycle, we need to intervene during the early childhood years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwini. That was a really excellent presentation. And as someone who's always very skeptical about the way people use econometrics and numbers, I think you provided a real model of how you can use numbers to tease out a puzzle and look at it from all different angles in a way that leaves you with a certain degree of certainty about the conclusions that you arrived at. So I think it's a real model of econometric analysis and detective work, combined. I think I just want to make one comment or two and then open it up. I think my one comment there are two facts you gave us at the beginning, which were very striking. One was the comparison between India and China, two huge countries. Right? So you can't explain the high percentages of people, numbers malnourished in India only by the size of India. There's something else going on. And then the comparison between India and sub-Saharan Africa, which is about growth rates. And you find that India, with higher growth rates and so on, still performs badly on malnutrition. And I think recently a global ranking of estimate came out, and India performs it's ranked very low. And I think you are telling us that unless it tackles this very fundamental inequality, this is not going to go away. It can grow as fast as it wants, but unless it tackles this inequality, and when we talk about durable inequalities, we usually talk about inequalities last over generations. You're showing us an inequality that has lasted over centuries, and therefore has taken deep roots in culture, in economics, and in people's minds. So I really found this, particularly because of the use of very solid data, a very powerful argument. So having said my piece, we are going to take questions. I ask you to keep your questions brief so that lots of people can ask questions. We'll take one from in-house and one from, and Peter will tell us the online. So Mokalika's got her hand up before anyone else.
Thank you, only because I have to go teach. Hi, Ashwini.
Hi. Can I stop sharing because I can see people then?
Yes, do.
Hi.
Yes.
So that, like Naila said, that was so convincing and thought-provoking and terrifying, really, and disheartening. Just to be annoying and ask you a question about what you did not present, but whether you had any hunches. The Vindhya range does a horizontal split of India. Since we've had other data on a vertical split of India, where you get, say, sex preference ratio of female child versus male child, what is your hunch? I mean, as you know, I study West Bengal. What is your hunch for Eastern India versus Western India? And especially in states where there is a higher proportion of Muslim populations, where, like you said, yes, there is a lot of caste, but the practice of caste amongst Muslims is rigid, but not about untouchability in the same way, right? So what is your hunch about East and West India?
We're going to take a couple of questions and then hand over to you. Is there an online question?
So we've got a hand up from Purnima and a hand up from Alpha.
Okay, who was the first person?
Purnima.
Purnima, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I just wanted to maybe ask a question that is related to, if I were to try and teach this in a classroom, because I'm really struck by both what you've presented, but the implications of what you've presented, because I can imagine, students or, people in the kind of policy field saying, okay, we see the data, we see the correlation, but should we be tackling caste discrimination, or should we be tackling the more kind of proximate causes that are related to caste discrimination, right? So the lack of prenatal care, say housing discrimination, and therefore housing related, lack of access to clean water and so forth. And I really take, your message to be that we need to deal with caste discrimination directly. But, am I first right in saying that, and could you maybe substantiate why it's important to tackle caste discrimination and not simply some of those things that we might already have a handle on as
okay, thank you.
Causes of stunting?
We'll take one more, and I don't see anyone here. Me. You, okay. Okay. Hi, Ashwini.
Hi.
Hi.
Ashwini, I've got a more of an anthropological question, if I may, because it was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm just wondering whether, you've also seen or dealt with ethnographic evidence of, because caste is also a fluid category, what anthropology and history has shown us. People from even the lowest castes, shift identities, shift occupations, as the anthropological and historical literature has shown us. So when there's social mobility, has this stunting become less? Is there any ethnographic evidence linking this to social mobility and less stunting?
Okay, over to you, Ashwini, for those three.
Yeah, well, thank you. Three excellent questions. Hi, Mukulika. I can't see you very well, but we'll catch up offline. So let me begin with the last question first, because I have clearer answers for the last question, which is that within caste groups, if you are richer, children are less likely to be stunted. So class within a caste group does play a role. In general, richer families have better access to health care, have better access to food, have better sanitation, a lower disease environment. So that's why you see the prevalence of stunting amongst richer households everywhere in the world is lower than the prevalence of stunting amongst poorer households. And this is true for Dalits as well. Now, what we are saying is that the channel that we've identified is discrimination in the access to public health services, which is vaccination, mothers' health, etc. And if you're amongst the top, say, I don't know, 5% or whatever, you are less likely to use public healthcare services. You're likely to pay and get your, vaccinations, etc. So this may not explain the difference between the very rich Dalits and the very rich upper caste, except the group of very rich Dalits is far smaller in absolute and proportionate terms compared to a very rich upper caste. So there has been some social mobility in terms of occupation, but I think what the literature on untouchability shows is that social mobility or an increase in economic circumstances does not automatically reduce stigma. And for that, you can only, you can look at evidence from the Western countries. You can look at, African Americans who belong into a certain, there's these famous stories of Oprah Winfrey, Barack Obama, who was mistaken for the valet when he attended, before he became president, and his face was not so well known because he was dressed in a black tie. Just because he was a black man, people thought he was a valet, and somebody gave him the car keys. So just because you are rich doesn't mean that discrimination or stigma automatically reduces. And there are many examples of this in India. For example, there is no increase in intercaste marriages between richer Dalits and upper caste. You don't see that at all. So there are limits that doesn't cross. So having said that, stunting rates amongst richer people in general are lower than stunting rates among poorer people. So that's caste fluidity. The thing about caste in India, as you know very well, is that these are categories that have been made for affirmative action. So this is not jati level information. This is these aggregate administrative categories. That's the difference that we are showing. And to map it at the jati level would be virtually impossible because we don't have that data. So which jatis have experienced greater upward mobility compared to which other jatis, etc. That would be that kind of an exercise, which is, at the moment is not possible. Mukulika, East, West, honestly, I don't know. I feel like maybe the outcomes are going to be less rigid in the West, but the West is also, it combines Rajasthan with Maharashtra, and there'll be huge differences between Rajasthan and Maharashtra, and there are, I know that. So I'm hesitant to take this line. And also, I'm not very sure of what the dividing line would be, that would naturally divide East and West in terms of the practice of the caste, or the origin and the spread of the caste system. Within Muslims, you're absolutely right that there is no, caste-based untouchability of the kind that Hindus have. However, there is evidence of cemeteries being different, for example. So, Hindu untouchables that converted to Islam do report, and these days there's been a lot of discussion of that in the Indian media. So yeah, it's a great question, and something to be looked at in the future. Purnima, what should be done first? Is it like the larger problem of discrimination or the manifestations of discrimination? I don't see them as either or. I mean, the manifestations of discriminations have to be tackled. The reason that the larger story of discrimination has to be kept in mind is that if you didn't do that, you would assume that if there is a public health clinic in a village, it's meant to provide medicines and vaccinations to everybody, and it probably does that, because you wouldn't even think about the fact that belief in untouchability might be affecting the service provision to different children from different caste groups, or mothers from different caste groups. So there, tackling discrimination means making sure that the entitlements reach all, all sections. So what my answer to would be always be aware of the larger discrimination story, but actually make sure that whatever the entitlements are, whether it's education, whether it's, overall right to the life of dignity, if I could summarize it that way with, all the attendant things, tackle each thing at its source, or at its occurrence, and make sure that it doesn't happen. Easier said than done, but that would be my, I wouldn't separate the two.
We're going to take a couple more, and we'll take Alpa has had her hand up. And anyone here? No, and then that's Parto, yes. And then we'll wrap up, okay?
Thanks so much, Ashwini. It's so lovely to see you, and I admire you once again for, bringing the significance of caste to the table in these general figures. You did that with the grammar of caste alongside several other progressive economists who were showing, how we can't talk about India as a whole, and how we've got to look at, poverty levels and how they're different between Adivasis and Dalits and the rest of India. And and you're doing this once again in this new way with new data. So I really admire you for that, and thank you for doing that. I guess where what I find a little bit more problematic is your is taking the Vindhya Mountain range as your kind of like your origins of caste idea, and that guiding how you determine where this is all coming from and what is driving it. And as you, I'm sure, well know, there are other theories of the origins of India, and caste untouchability is very, very prevalent also in the south, particularly in the southern states, the agricultural plains of Tamil Nadu, for instance. And I'm thinking of the work of Rupa Vishwanath and Dharma Kumar, who have a different theory of caste and its origins in agricultural labor and the exploitation of Dalits as labor. I was wondering, what would happen to your kind of theorization and your conclusions if you took these other ideas of the origins of caste as being central, and whether that would lead you to pointing to the significance of stunting also in the southern states beyond your 100-kilometer divide, and if you then that would then also lead you to thinking not only in terms of differences in healthcare access, but also thinking about the very severe exploitation of Dalits in the labor process as being really central to why these high levels of stunting exist amongst Dalits. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. We'll take one more question because we're reaching the end of our time. So the last one. You're muted.
Yes, here I am. My first question was on your graph about different states experiencing untouchability and practicing untouchability. Kerala and West Bengal are in the extreme left of the axis, near the point of origin, which is expectable. However, I was kind of impressed that in Kerala, the experiencing and practicing untouchability are nearly at the same point, whereas in West Bengal, if I could read it right quickly, the experiencing untouchability is higher, even though the practicing reported untouchability in the two states is nearly the same. Is it because, why did you kind of ponder the matter? And the second thing is simply factual, Ashwini, is Madhya Pradesh, where is it? Have you included in north or south of India, or is it because it's by district, it doesn't matter? So I would love to get some information on that. Thank you.
So Ashwini?
Yeah, thank you, Partho, and thank you, Alpa, for your questions. Let me start with Partho's questions, easier. This is self-reported practice. So, it's a question of, in West Bengal, how many people think that they practice untouchability? And so you might be practicing it, but you don't really see that as untouchability, So if you keep a separate tumbler for the cleaner in the house and you give, nobody else uses that, that's actually an act of untouchability, but you might not even recognize it as untouchability. So that is just that, or you're smart and you're supposed to answer. You're not supposed to say yes. So you're very aware that this is what you're doing, but you're just smarter and not going to admit it. So that data, there is a lot of, so it's not like an authentic, foolproof, this is the proportion, but it's just really an indicative data. The reason we plotted that graph was to just make sure that these responses are not completely off the charts, like completely random. So where people say we practice, higher proportion of people say we practice untouchability, higher proportions of Dalit must say that we experience untouchability. That would be like a consistency check. And that consistency check hold out. The purpose of that graph was just to show that. Madhya Pradesh is both on both sides. So the Vindhya Mountain range will, we are just looking at districts to the 100 kilometers to the north and the south. That brings me to Alpa's question, which is the first. So we are very aware that the Vindhya Mountain range is an idea that we thought of, and we are exploring that. And this is a working paper, so all comments are welcome at this point. So supposing the Vindhya Mountain range goes away and we remove that part of the analysis, the association between higher practice of untouchability all over the country and higher rates of stunting amongst Dalit children remains. That is not dependent on Vindhya or 100 kilometers or anything. And moreover, higher reported proportions of untouchability do not affect stunting rates amongst upper caste children. That also remains. So these two things remain, and you can go as far north and as far south as you want, and this remains. In general, southern states have lower incidence of stunting compared to northern children. So better provision of healthcare delivery, etc. So these broad differences amongst regions and amongst communities, we are able to establish without the Vindhya part of the paper at all. So all of those, but in economics as a profession is very driven by causality. None of those things would be seen as causal. They would be associations, and they're very strong associations. So it could be a paper only about associations. So at the end of the day, whether the Vindhya section will stay or not, I don't know. Depends on how the referees receive it. But supposing it went away, supposing it had to be eliminated from the paper, but the correlational story is very strong. That part of the story stays. Now, where does the Vindhya thing come in? It comes in, it just literally, it provides a sort of a natural boundary. It's like, like a shock. Supposing there's demonetization that happened, which caught everybody unawares. Was everybody equally affected by demonetization? Right? So that's like a natural experiment. If something happens, nobody was prepared for it. And then you examine the impact, controlling for other things. And if women were, for example, I have a paper which shows that women's labor force participation rate fell by a larger proportion than men's labor force participation rate as a result of demonetization in India, right? So it was an economic shock that happened to everybody, but section of the population was disproportionately disadvantaged. Conceptually, that's the kind of role that the Vindhya Mountain range is playing in this analysis. So there's a historical spread of the caste system. It's settled in a particular way, and that provided. Now, I've sent it to a few historians. Maybe this will stay, maybe this won't stay. We'll see. But even if, the worst case scenario, the Vindhya section goes away from the paper, the rest of it is still very strong.
Yeah,
so the caste differences, the regional differences, the untouchability and caste correlation is very, very strong. Untouchability and stunting correlation. That's what I mean. That part doesn't work.
Thank you very much. But I think also, just one footnote is that this north-south divide, whether we take it as the Vindhya Mountains or not, that has been in existence on a range of indicators: demography, health, sexual gender differentials, economy. So yes. The Vindhya Mountain is, as you say, is a heuristic device. Yes. But that north-south, and it makes me ask, is caste practiced differently in the south? So as Alpa says, yes, there is. Untouchability isn't practiced differently. Not to be answered, it's just throwing it in. But let me say thank you enormously to Ashwini, and thank you to all our audience. Sorry. And I have something else to say. What do I have to say? Yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone in the audience. If you want to hear more about LSE International Inequalities Institute, visit our website to learn about upcoming events and sign in on to the fortnightly newsletter. Until we meet again, thank you and goodbye.